Have you ever stood at the edge of something good and watched yourself ruin it? A relationship, an opportunity, a dream you once prayed for, you knew you wanted it. Yet some part of you pulled away, disappeared, or broke it with your own hands. It is not weakness. It is not stupidity. It is not failure. It is something older, deeper, more hidden. It is the voice you do not hear clearly, but obey without question. The voice that whispers you are not ready, not worthy, not enough. Carl Jung called this the shadow. But it is not just darkness. It is disconnection. A part of you split off long ago. And now, when something good arrives, that part rises and says no. Not to hurt you, but to protect you from pain it once knew. You are not alone. Everyone carries a saboteur inside. A quiet reflex that turns against growth. Not because you do not want change, but because the part of you most afraid of it is still in charge. Until it is seen, it stays in control. What if you are not broken? What if your self-sabotage is not dysfunction, but memory? A defense that has outlived its purpose. What if the part of you that ruins joy is the part of you that was never allowed to feel safe with it? Carl Jung was not interested in fixing the surface. He wanted to uncover what lay beneath it. For him, real transformation began where the conscious mind lost control, where the unknown parts of the self came alive. He introduced the concept of the shadow, the parts of yourself that you repress, deny, or exile. Not only the darkness others see, but the shame you hide from yourself. Not only anger and fear, but buried dreams and silenced potential. The inner saboteur lives in that shadow. It is not a monster. It is a forgotten child, a part of you shaped by rejection, punishment, confusion. It learned long ago that being small, quiet, or broken was safer than being seen. Jung believed what we reject becomes autonomous. It acts without our permission. The more we ignore it, the more power it gains. That is why your sabotage feels uncontrollable. It is not conscious. It is the shadow calling for integration. To understand the saboteur is to see your own fragmentation. You are not just one self. You are many selves. Some of them carry wounds. Some hold brilliance, but all of them want to belong again. Even the ones that ruin what you love. You say you want love, yet you pull away when it gets too close. You say you want change, yet you delay what you know will help. You say you want peace, yet you create chaos. This contradiction is not weakness. It is a pattern. The inner saboteur does not shout, it whispers. It tells you to wait until you're ready, knowing you'll never feel ready. It tells you to stay safe, even when safety costs you your joy. It always sounds reasonable, even when it keeps you stuck. It appears as procrastination, as perfectionism, as sudden doubt right before you begin, as staying too long where you do not belong, as walking away when things finally feel good. Not because you do not want them, but because they feel unfamiliar. It looks like choosing partners who cannot love you, like avoiding the call that could change your life, like quitting just before the breakthrough, like turning down praise, opportunities, or intimacy because a voice inside says, "Not me." Sometimes it wears the mask of logic. You call it timing. You call it being realistic, but behind those masks is fear. A fear so old and embedded that you no longer question it. You mistake it for identity. You forget it is protection. The saboteur hides in habits. You overwork to avoid stillness. You stay busy so you don't feel. You start new goals so you never have to finish the old ones. You become masterful at surviving. But you forget how to actually live. It speaks in your own voice, so you believe it. You believe the thoughts that say you're not enough, that you will fail anyway, that you should wait a little longer. The sabotage becomes invisible because it sounds like you. This is not simply negative thinking. It is a psychic reflex, a defense system, a learned pattern that once kept you safe. Now it keeps you small. Not because it wants to hurt you, but because it does not yet trust the life waiting beyond fear. The inner saboteur is not born from malice. It is born from pain. It is the voice that formed when you were told you were too much, or not enough, when you reached out and no one came, when your truth was met with silence or shame. Children do not know how to process betrayal, so they adapt. They silence parts of themselves. They internalize rejection as identity. They trade authenticity for approval. And the cost of survival becomes the abandonment of the true self. Carl Jung believed that what is not integrated becomes autonomous. What is pushed into the shadow begins to live its own life. The inner saboteur is the orphan self, acting out from the dark, not to destroy you, but to remind you of what was lost. It carries the voice of past authority figures, of the parent who withheld love, of the teacher who humiliated, of the culture that demanded perfection. Those voices become inner laws. You obey them long after they are gone. The saboteur is not just fear, it is memory. The memory of punishment, of exclusion, of humiliation. It remembers what happened last time you tried to speak, to shine, to love. And so it pulls you back before the risk can happen again. Sometimes the wound is not loud. It is quiet and cumulative. You were never hit, never screamed at. But you were unseen, unfelt, emotionally neglected. And so a part of you decided to disappear. That disappearance became your strategy for safety. Over time, the protective self became the dominant self. It learned to anticipate pain and avoid it at all costs. Even if that meant abandoning your own dreams. Even if that meant sabotaging anything that felt too real or too alive. But no defense lasts forever. Eventually, the soul begins to rebel. It creates symptoms. Discontent, restlessness, repetition. These are not failures. They are invitations, not to push harder, but to turn inward. To meet what has been exiled. Carl Jung taught that the psyche is not one solid identity. It is a complex system of inner parts, many of which remain unconscious. When pain or trauma overwhelms the conscious self, a split occurs. That part of the psyche becomes disassociated. The inner saboteur is one such part. It carries memories, fears, and beliefs the conscious mind could not process. So it was pushed away, buried, left to operate in the dark. But what is hidden does not disappear. It gains autonomy. Jung saw these disassociated parts as living realities. They are not metaphors. They are psychological fragments with their own energy, emotions, and voice. When denied, they influence us in ways we do not recognize. They sabotage not to harm, but to survive. To the saboteur, success feels unsafe. Love feels dangerous. Joy feels unfamiliar. So it acts, it delays, it destroys. Not out of cruelty, but out of loyalty to its own internal logic. A logic shaped by wounds, not wisdom. The more you reject this part, the more powerful it becomes. Because rejection is what created it. Jung emphasized, what we fail to make conscious becomes fate. The saboteur is not fate. But if you ignore it, it will direct your life as if it were. This is not about positive thinking. It is about inner reconciliation. You cannot heal what you still fight. You cannot integrate what you still shame. The saboteur does not need punishment. It needs presence. It needs to be heard and welcomed home. Jung did not teach people to eliminate their darkness. He taught them to make it conscious, to bring it into relationship with the self. The saboteur, when integrated, becomes something else entirely, a protector, a guide, a source of discernment. You do not sabotage because you hate yourself. You sabotage because some part of you believes it is safer that way. Safer to pull back than be abandoned. Safer to fail early than hope and fall later. Sabotage is protection disguised as destruction. Carl Jung understood that the psyche has its own survival strategies. When wounded, it learns. If you were hurt when you tried, it learns not to try. If you were punished for shining, it learns to stay invisible. Pain teaches, even if the lessons are false. The inner saboteur is the guardian of these early learnings. It does not trust life to be kind. It does not believe you can have what you want without cost, so it intervenes. It ruins what feels good before it can be taken away. You cancel the date before they can leave. You delay the project before someone else can criticize it. You numb yourself before the disappointment hits. Each act feels irrational on the surface, but inside, it makes perfect emotional sense. This is not a logical problem. It is a wound response. A pattern created in the nervous system, not in the intellect. The body remembers the moment the heart broke. The psyche builds defenses around that memory. The saboteur stands at the gate. To change this, you do not need to be harder on yourself. You need to be more compassionate. You need to ask, what am I protecting myself from? What pain am I expecting? What would happen if I stayed present instead of escaping? Your sabotage is not rebellion. It is fear, and fear is not your enemy. It is a signal. It points to where healing is needed. Jung believed all symptoms are symbolic. They carry meaning. They are not problems to be fixed, but messages to be heard. The inner saboteur does not always choose what hurts the most. It chooses what feels most familiar. You return to the same kinds of relationships, the same emotional dead ends, the same self-doubt. Not because you want to suffer, but because you know the script. Carl Jung believed the unconscious is conservative. It repeats patterns, even painful ones, especially painful ones, because repetition gives the illusion of control. If you can predict the fall, it hurts less than being surprised again. You choose what you know, even if what you know is rejection, or betrayal, or silence, because deep down, the unknown feels more dangerous than the known wound. You sabotage new possibilities because they feel unfamiliar, unsafe, uncertain. You date someone who reminds you of the parent who withheld love. You quit just before success because success would shatter your identity as someone who always falls short. You pick failure because failure feels like home. This is not conscious. It is archetypal. It is the psyche's attempt to master what once overwhelmed it, to recreate the original injury, but this time with more control. You are not chasing pain. You are chasing resolution without knowing it. But healing cannot come from repetition. Healing begins when you notice the loop, when you ask, why do I know this feeling so well? What part of me keeps coming back here? What am I reenacting instead of releasing? To Jung, this is the beginning of consciousness. The moment you stop blaming fate and start seeing the inner pattern. Not with shame, not with judgment, but with curiosity, compassion, and the willingness to interrupt the cycle. You do not need to keep living the same chapter just because it is the only one you remember. You can learn to write a different story. But first, you must stop calling sabotage bad luck. It is not luck. It is memory on repeat. When the pain of rejection becomes too deep to hold, the psyche adapts. It creates a story. A self-concept that makes the pain feel logical. You are not unloved. You are unlovable. You are not ignored. You are not worth hearing. That story becomes the false self. Carl Jung understood this dynamic well. He saw how people abandon their true nature to become what the world seems to accept. You stop being who you are. You start being who they want, or worse, who they feared. You become the version of you that feels safest. The saboteur builds this false self like armor. But it is armor that sinks you. You wear labels like not good enough, too broken, always failing. You start to identify with the outcome. You do not just fail, you become a failure. You do not just get hurt, you are the one who always gets hurt. This identity begins to feel solid, predictable, familiar. It gives structure to your story. And because the unconscious loves consistency, you repeat experiences that reinforce it. You turn away from joy, not because you hate joy, but because it contradicts the story of you. The false self fears success. because success would threaten the whole identity built around not being enough. The saboteur would rather lose and be right than win and lose the old identity. It would rather suffer within the known than heal in the unknown. But the truth is deeper. The true self has not disappeared. It has been covered, trapped beneath shame and silence. It waits patiently, beneath the roles you learned to play. Not broken, just hidden, not lost, just quiet. To live from the false self is exhausting. You perform instead of feel. You predict instead of trust. You react instead of choose. Jung believed the path to wholeness begins with dismantling the false self, not violently, but honestly, slowly, compassionately. You are not the story you had to tell yourself to survive. You are not the mask you wore to be accepted. You are what remains when the mask dissolves. That is where the saboteur loses its grip, not through force, but through truth. You receive a new opportunity, yet suddenly feel overwhelmed with doubt. You imagine everything that could go wrong. You hesitate. You procrastinate. You tell yourself it is not the right time. You call it logic, but it is fear. The saboteur has spoken. You fear success as much as failure, because success would demand visibility. It would ask you to own your voice, your talents, your power. And if a part of you is taught to equate power with danger, you will shrink. You will self-abandon. You stay in jobs that numb you. You say yes to work that drains you. You undercharge, overextend, or hide behind busyness. Not because you are incapable, but because you are unconsciously protecting an inner belief that you do not deserve more. Sometimes you sabotage by overworking. You make yourself indispensable so no one can criticize. You become addicted to proving your worth, but beneath the admit is fear. If I slow down, they might see I am not enough. You resist taking credit. You deflect praise. You avoid leadership roles, not because you cannot lead, but because somewhere in you, the idea of being seen still feels unsafe. Your saboteur would rather fail quietly than succeed visibly. You kill your own ideas before they are born. You delay starting the project. You abandon the application. You downgrade your ambition, not because you lack vision, but because the part of you shaped by shame does not yet believe you belong at the table. Carl Jung taught that the psyche resists individuation when the shadow is unintegrated. In career, that shadow says, who do you think you are to shine, to lead, to create? That question is not yours. It is inherited, and it can be unlearned. You crave intimacy, but pull away when someone gets too close. You long to be seen, but hide behind silence. You hope for lasting connection, but sabotage it before it can take root. The saboteur does not fear love. It fears the pain that love once brought. Carl Jung said we attract not who we want, but who reflects our unconscious. That means we often choose partners who mirror our buried wounds, the unavailable, the critical, the unstable. Not because we enjoy suffering, but because we are trying to rewrite an old story. You replay dynamics from childhood. The partner who withdraws makes you chase. The one who criticizes echoes a familiar voice. You say you want peace, but feel bored by kindness, because chaos feels like home, because love without pain feels unreal. You sabotage by testing, by withholding, by blaming. You create drama not out of cruelty, but as a way to feel control. If you start the fire, at least you are not surprised by the smoke. This is not dysfunction. It is strategy learned in shadow. You mistrust love that comes too easily. You wait for the other shoe to drop. You become hypervigilant. You read between words, brace for abandonment, and prepare to flee before being left. You are not cold. You are defended. The saboteur often uses shame. It whispers you are too much or not enough. It convinces you to settle, to stay where you are not met, to leave when someone finally sees you. Not because you are broken, but because being seen once felt dangerous. Real intimacy requires vulnerability. And vulnerability is terrifying when your inner world is full of wounds. The Saboteur says protect yourself. Jung would say, meet the part of you that believes love is not safe. Make it conscious. Make it whole. You read the books. You listen to the podcasts. You take the courses. But when real change comes close, you stall. You lose momentum. You look for a new method. Growth becomes preparation without action, insight without embodiment. Carl Jung warned against using self-development as spiritual bypass. The ego can hide inside the quest for healing. The Saboteur does not mind if you grow in circles, as long as you never actually break through. It prefers the safety of the known path. You stay addicted to beginnings, new ideas, new journaling routines, new breakthroughs, but you avoid the real work. Sitting with discomfort, facing the shadow, holding space for your own contradictions. Transformation is not tidy. The Saboteur resists the mess. You delay the hard conversations. You avoid stillness. You chase clarity, but refuse silence. Deep down, the part of you still attached to your old identity fears who you might become if you really change. So it protects the familiar suffering. Saboteur tells you to wait until you are ready, until you are perfect, until it feels safe. But readiness never comes from waiting. It comes from movement. Jung believed transformation begins not when we understand, but when we act despite fear. You might sabotage progress by overthinking, by staying in research mode forever, by needing more validation. You say you want change, but change threatens who you think you are, especially if your identity was built on struggle. You fear that healing means losing your edge, that peace means becoming soft, that letting go means becoming irrelevant. These fears are the voice of the Saboteur, disguised as caution. They keep you growing in theory, but not in life. Real growth humbles the ego. It dissolves the false self. It threatens the systems you built to survive. That is why the Saboteur rises up strongest when you are closest to the truth. Its resistance is not the end. It is a signal that you are on the edge of breakthrough. The Saboteur thrives in the dark. It feeds on your denial. It grows when you ignore it. You cannot defeat it by force. You cannot outrun it. Jung taught that what we repress becomes fate. And fate only shifts when it becomes conscious. You must learn to see it, hear it, sit with it. Not as an enemy, but as a messenger. Ask what it protects. Ask what it fears. Ask what it first appeared. You are not inviting destruction. You are opening the door to a part of you long abandoned. Do not try to fix it immediately. That is the ego's reflex. Instead, get curious. How does it speak? When does it rise? What patterns does it follow? Bring light without judgment. The Saboteur wants to be seen, not shamed. Jung did not believe in suppressing the dark. He believed in illuminating it. He believed the shadow becomes dangerous when ignored. But when brought into awareness, it becomes a source of transformation. The same applies to the Saboteur. Do not spiritualize it away. Do not positive think it into silence. That only pushes it deeper. Meet it eye to eye. In stillness. In reflection. In dreams. In moments where the impulse to sabotage returns, pause, say, I see you. Then choose again. You are not weak for sabotaging. You are wounded. You are not broken for delaying. You are scared. Begin with that truth. Then choose presence over patterns, again and again. This is how you begin to reclaim the part of you that was left in shadow. Begin with awareness. The next time you feel resistance, pause. Ask what part of you is afraid. What story is playing underneath your hesitation? Give that part a name, a voice, a presence. Do not push it away. Invite it into the room. Journaling is a powerful entry point. Write not only what you feel, but what you are avoiding. What dreams you keep postponing. What patterns keep showing up. Ask yourself gently, What am I afraid would happen if I actually succeeded? Observe your emotional triggers. When you feel jealousy, shame, or disproportionate fear, look beneath it. The saboteur often speaks in exaggeration. What it says might not be true, but it reveals something that once felt true enough to hurt. Use active imagination, a practice Jung developed. Sit in silence and speak directly to the saboteur. Let it answer back. Not through logic, but through images, sensations, symbols. Let the unconscious reveal what the conscious mind cannot see. Dreams are also a mirror. Pay attention to recurring symbols, destructive acts, or blocked movements in your dreams. The saboteur may appear as a shadowy figure, a collapsing structure, or a fleeing animal. Ask, what is this image protecting? Bring the body into the process. Notice where you tense up when taking a risk, where your breath stops when someone sees you. The saboteur lives not just in thought, but in muscle and memory. Integration means listening with your whole being. Most importantly, create inner space without judgment. Speak to yourself with the tone you never received. The tone that says, I know you are scared, and I am still here. Inner safety is the ground from which all transformation grows. Carl Jung did not ask us to eliminate the darkness. He asked us to bring it into awareness. He wrote, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The saboteur is part of that darkness. Within the saboteur is locked energy, passion twisted into fear, creativity frozen by shame, leadership stifled by old beliefs. When you integrate the saboteur, you do not become someone else. You recover the power that was always yours. What once blocked you becomes a doorway. What once triggered you becomes a teacher. What once felt like self-destruction becomes self-revelation. The saboteur is not your curse, it is your key. To hold it is to step out of unconscious repetition. True power is not dominance, it is presence. It is the courage to stay with what is real. When you stop rejecting the parts of you that sabotage, you begin to rewire the entire system. You are no longer at war within yourself. Jung believed that wholeness is not perfection. It is the union of opposites. The conscious and unconscious, the light and the dark, the self and the saboteur. This union does not erase the pain, but it transforms the pain into depth, into strength, into soul. The darkness you feared is your ally in disguise. When seen, it becomes vision. When accepted, it becomes will. When loved, it becomes the most human part of you. The saboteur's final gift is this, not to ruin you, but to return you to yourself. You wake up one day and notice something has changed. Not everything is perfect, not every fear is gone. But the voice of sabotage is no longer the loudest one in the room. Something softer has taken its place. Something rooted. You begin to choose from clarity, not from panic. You respond rather than react. You pause before quitting. You speak even when your voice shakes. This is not confidence. It is congruence. Your inner world is no longer at war with itself. You no longer confuse safety with smallness. You stop shrinking to fit other people's comfort. You allow yourself to take up space. Not to dominate, but to finally belong to yourself. You are not performing anymore. You are present. What you feared as weakness becomes your doorway to connection. The parts of you that once sabotaged are now allies. Not erased, but transformed. They no longer scream, they guide. They remind you to slow down, to check in, to stay true. This freedom is subtle but seismic. You feel it in how you say no, in how you rest, in how you dream again without apology. The saboteur's power has faded because you no longer need it to protect you. You have become your own protector. For years you believed something inside you wanted to ruin your life. You fought it, rejected it, tried to silence it. But slowly, as you listened deeper, you realized it was not your enemy. It was your exile, a voice you abandoned to survive. Carl Jung taught that what we reject in ourselves does not disappear. It retreats into shadow, into symptom, into the very patterns we most hate, not to punish us, but to call us back. Every sabotage was not destruction. It was a coded message. The part that made you quit was not lazy. It was terrified of being seen and hurt again. The part that pushed love away was not cold. It remembered how painful it was to be left behind. The part that delayed your dreams did not hate success. It just never believed you could hold it. The saboteur does not want you to fail. It wants you to stay safe. Its methods are outdated, but its intentions were protective. When you understand this, blame dissolves. In its place comes grief, then compassion, then reunion. What once felt like darkness becomes direction. What once felt like weakness becomes wisdom. What once felt like failure becomes foundation. Jung believed healing is remembering. Not who you should be, but who you were before fear taught you to fragment. The saboteur's resistance was never random. It pointed exactly to the wound you needed to heal. The moment you stop running from it, the inner world begins to realign. You realize you were never broken, only disconnected. Carl Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, not because the self is evil, but because wholeness requires surrendering the stories we built to survive." It asks us to welcome even the parts we feared most. The saboteur was never the villain. It was the signal. It interrupted your plans not to destroy them, but to ask a deeper question. Are you building from truth or from fear? Are you expanding or protecting an identity that no longer serves you? You were not weak for sabotaging. You were wise enough to slow down until your soul felt safe. You were not broken. You were divided. And every act of self-sabotage was your inner world trying to find its way back to wholeness. You no longer need to fight yourself. You are not an enemy to fix. You are a being to return to. Each time you listen instead of reject, each time you pause instead of punish, you create space for healing. That space is sacred. You were never too much, never not enough. You were simply incomplete. And now, slowly, you are remembering. The saboteur fades not when you conquer it, but when you welcome it. When you say, "I hear you, and I am ready to come home." You are not a problem to fix. You are a story unfolding. A soul remembering its way home. All the sabotage, all the setbacks, all the ways you turned against yourself were not failures. They were part of the map. The way back was always through. Carl Jung never asked us to become better. He asked us to become whole. He knew that real transformation comes not by escaping the shadow, but by making peace with it. Not by chasing light, but by becoming the light that can hold the dark. You are not late. You are not behind. You are exactly where your healing needed to begin. The saboteur led you here, not to ruin you, but to break the illusion that you had to be anything other than fully yourself. So do not rush to erase your mistakes. Sit with them. Learn their language. Let them speak. There is a kind of wisdom that only pain can teach. A kind of freedom that only comes when you stop hiding from what hurts. You are not broken. You are returning. Every breath that meets yourself with gentleness is a revolution. Every time you choose presence over performance, truth over perfection, you reclaim a little more of your soul. Take a breath and ask yourself gently, what part of me do I keep rejecting? What voice inside me have I silenced for too long? What is the cost of continuing to betray myself in small, quiet ways? What would it feel like to trust myself, even when I am afraid? What if the life I long for is waiting just beyond the part of me I keep trying to fix? What if I do not need fixing, only returning? Carl Jung did not promise ease. He promised meaning. He did not offer shortcuts. He pointed to the path that leads inward, where every shadow is sacred, where every fear is a doorway, where the saboteur, when seen, becomes your guide. This is not the end of your journey. It is a beginning. Not toward perfection, but toward truth. Not toward changing who you are, but toward remembering who you were before the world told you to be small. The next time you hear the voice inside saying, "You cannot," or "You will fail," or "You are not enough," pause and ask, whose voice is this? And who might I become if I chose not to believe it anymore? Come home, not to an ideal, but to your wholeness. Come home, not to who you should be, but to the one you were always becoming, quietly, patiently, beautifully, in your own time.